You know, sometimes I'm just a little too perfectionist. I've been spending way too much time trying to get the right frame here. Don't do what I do, all right? Once again, I'm toying with my safety to bring you another sword review in front of the most epic background I can find, yet some of you can't even be bothered to leave a like. Just kidding, thanks for being here. All right, so this is a reproduction of a 19th century shamshir by LK Chen. Judging the historical accuracy of this one is going to be a little bit easier than usual because this is a replica of a specific original at the Met Museum in New York City, which is quite obvious when you compare them side by side. There are some differences. For example, this one has a metal end cap that the original doesn't, but there's another one at the Metropolitan Museum that looks very similar that does have this kind of pommel cap. So I'm assuming they just supplemented it from that. The measurements and other specs will be in the video description below, along with a link to where you can find it. Keep in mind that LK Chen sent this to me for free to review, and also that link to Cult of Athena is an affiliate link. I generally try to be as unbiased as possible, of course, but that's something to point out. All right, so in this case, I have the luxury of being able to compare the measurements of the reproduction and the original. As far as the total length is concerned, always a bit difficult to measure with such a strongly curved blade, but if you go in a straight line from the tip to the end of the pommel, it's the same length as the original. The weight, interestingly, is a little bit less here. It's about 150 grams less than the original, which is the opposite direction that I normally expect. Usually reproductions are way heavier than the originals, but this is lighter. I don't even know what to make of it. The weight of this reproduction is about 80%, I think it was 82% of the original, so that should be noticeable. If you handled the two, then yeah, the original would feel a little bit heavier, but it's still within the historical ballpark. When I compare different originals for which the weights are given, I can see that it's usually between 700 and 900 grams. Like other sabers of this kind, the handle has a 90-degree bend at the end, which is functional, a safety feature basically, to not slip off. You know, this way it hooks into your hand, and that is rather useful, particularly because it has just fairly smooth wooden handle scales. So it is somewhat slippery compared to a leather-bound wrapped handle. I do rely on this, and I find when you keep your hand hooked in there, you can cut in whatever way you like, whether it be with a hammer grip or a handshake grip, thumb on the back or not. There's a number of different grips you could use with this, and it works perfectly well. It's not coming out of the hand. And importantly, the handle is well shaped. It's a little narrower than other types of sword, but it is still a rectangular cross-section, well rounded off, so there are no hard corners. In fact, it's extremely smooth and comfortable, so nothing at all wrong with that. It's ridiculous how light this is, right? I mean, for one, it's less than 800 grams. That's already quite light. Even if this was of uniform thickness, it would feel just fine. It would be quite light, obviously. But this, in addition to being that light, also has a significant distal taper. Now you can see how it's thinner near the hilt and then thins out toward the point. You can see the balance right here, and that makes this saber extremely nimble, like ridiculously so. You can very quickly swing it around, change direction, like feint and quickly attack another opening. It's so easy to move this around. Takes very little effort. Perfect. That's what you want. It may not matter for a collector because we don't get into sword fights, but it is all part of the historical accuracy, and of course it helps with cutting. Another thing that very much does is the blade geometry. It has a flat grind, so it tapers all the way from the spine to the edge, and there's no secondary bevel. That all serves to magnify its sliciness, technical term. If you're one of those people who subscribe to the notion that curvature is what makes a sword cut particularly well, it doesn't get much more curvaceous than this. You should be fanboying pretty hard over the shamshir, if that's how you think. And the cutting performance is indeed outstanding. What really impressed me is what happened on that day when I tested a bunch of swords on mats that I wasn't terribly happy with. I put hardwood dowels in them. Unknown hardwoods, just something I found at a dollar store or as garden stakes, and that didn't turn out so well.
Let me guess, got stuck in the dowel again.
There's probably a combination of factors. So the mats weren't quite as good as some of the ones that I used to have. Some of the swords really struggled to cleanly get through those dowels. By the time I got to this, I had already taken several cuts with different swords, and I had started to ramp up the force continuously because it just didn't go the way I wanted. The cuts weren't as clean. Sometimes it didn't go through at all. And then I got to this, and this is what happened. Ooh. I overswung like a buffalo. What the hell? What just happened? Look at this. And by the way, this is why you don't cut toward your lead leg. What I mean is, if you're right-handed and you're throwing a diagonal cut from your upper right to your lower left, your right leg needs to be forward. Because if it's the other way around, if your left leg is forward and you end up overpowering, missing or whatever, and you end up with this kind of number here, guess where your leg is, possibly in the way. Sure, that's really only likely to happen with a fairly steep angle. If it's like a 45, then it should not endanger the leg, but either way, don't cut toward your lead leg. Important safety tip. Not every cut with the shamshir was ridiculously smooth. Those cores definitely put up a fight and increased the difficulty. And some of my cuts just weren't very good. I can tell that I'm a little bit rusty, and sometimes the edge alignment was just a little off. But this sword was like a cheat code on that day. This performed better than any of the others, and I tested 6 or so, and this was by far the easiest to cut with. Now, when I got to the last 2 mats, which didn't have a core, suddenly I could cut just fine with the other swords. There we go. It was the damn dowels. So that shows that those wooden cores crank up the difficulty a little too much. By the way, if you are interested in the full edit of that frustrating day of cutting, it'll be available as bonus content for the duelist tier via YouTube memberships and on Patreon. Link down below if you're interested in joining. There's a lot of fun stuff happening there. So the cutting performance is just about as good as the handling, if not better. I mean, really, the only way you could make it even better would be by making the blade wider. You can always push it further. The wider the blade is, the more mass you have, the more gradually it tapers from the spine to the edge and all of that. But also more mass means it's not going to be quite as lightning fast. For a fighting sword, there's nothing wrong with this, and it ended up surprisingly durable. I hit the stand. Oh, I hit the stake. I definitely hit the stake. Yep. High stakes indeed. Oh, that sounded awful. Huh. Can't see anything. That's what I was a little bit worried about, because generally anytime you try to maximize the cutting power of a blade, you tend to compromise its strength and durability just naturally. The more you taper it, the thinner the blade gets near the edge, the better it cuts, but the more likely you are to damage the edge by bending it, rolling it, chipping it, whatever. And none of that happened here. The edge is still very sharp, and it held up beautifully. I didn't expect it, quite frankly. I was expecting at least minor edge damage, but no, nothing. The fit is extremely tight. There is a little bit of a fill, some kind of glue. When looking at the edges of the handle scales up close, the fit looks quite rough. And I would complain about that if this was a much higher price range. But for $380, I'm gonna let that slide. I've seen way worse. The cutout was not 100% precise, but the fill was done properly. In fact, the fit is tighter than on the original, in its current condition at least. The fit in the scabbard is also quite good. There is a little bit of a rattle, which is to be expected, just because the scabbard has to be open here for such a strongly curved blade. Otherwise, you wouldn't be able to unsheath it. So can't complain about that. And the scabbard is nice. It has the same fittings as the original. The good scabbard is pretty simple, but for the price, You can't expect any more. Nothing wrong with it. It's functional and all. Overall, it's hard to overstate just how good this reproduction is. Yes, there are a few differences to the original, nothing major, and definitely more accurate than most of what I see on the market. The handling is fantastic, the blade grind, the edge, everything is spot on. To even point out negatives at all, I have to get quite nitpicky. The decorations on the guard here are not quite as crisp as the original. The original has more contrast. They are in some areas slightly washed out. And the pin here that's used to secure the handle scales, it's peened over, but it's not ground down. So it's a little bit scratchy there, you can definitely feel it. It's not a big deal, it's just, it would be nicer if it was ground flush. And also the wood here split a little bit where it was peened over. That crack could potentially widen and lengthen over time. And of course, the issue is always when the wood gets shipped between different climate zones, like from China to Canada, there's always potential for it to shrink or expand or who knows what. So got to keep that in mind. But I don't really expect that to be an issue with this, but just something worth pointing out if you're going to talk about details. At this price, I mean, my feel for prices is a little bit outdated, I suppose, because money is worth less, everything has gotten more expensive, but that makes it even more remarkable. The fact that even with my outdated ideas about what a sword is worth, this still measures up extremely well. Really, if you like shamshirs or sabers in general, get one of these. All right, keeping my personal bias in mind because they sent this to me for free, but I would have bought it if not for that. That's for sure. This is extremely nice, and this is a sword type that was missing in my collection. So very glad to have that right now. So that's about it. Hope you found this review helpful. Thanks for watching. Again, check out the specs down below and the link to where you can buy it. Thanks for watching, folks. Stay safe. Funnily enough, right now it's safer closer to the water because I have a more stable platform here, as opposed to up there, which is where I've been trying to set up.